Love history? Subscribe and explore the stories that shaped our world.
Step into the world of a true Renaissance genius, a man who could paint the most captivating portraits one minute and design machines that would not be built for centuries the next. Born in 1452 in the small village of Vinci, Leonardo was the illegitimate son of a notary, Ser Piero da Vinci. Raised primarily by his grandparents and his uncle, Leonardo was inherently curious about everything from the moment he opened his eyes. Even as a child, his mind was always racing. He studied nature in ways no one else did, wondering how birds flew, why the wind blew, and how water carved through the land. A pivotal moment in his life came in the 1460s when, at just 14 years old, he moved to Florence and began his apprenticeship under the renowned artist Andrea del Verrocchio. Verrocchio was essentially a one-man university of the arts, and his workshop was the meeting place for all the artistic youth of Florence. Here, Leonardo learned the skills of painting, sculpture, and engineering. But more importantly, Verrocchio fostered a revolutionary approach. Rather than imitating the works of previous masters, he taught his students to master nature in its reality. Under this tutelage, Leonardo and his peers were grounded in the scientific principles of observation, analysis, and experiment. The distinction between art and science began to blur, forging a philosophy that Leonardo would carry for the rest of his life. As Leonardo himself would later write, "Science is the captain, practice the soldier." This profound belief that to understand art, one had to understand science and the beauty of nature allowed Leonardo to completely reinvent painting. His curiosity about the human soul drove him to capture emotions and human expression in unprecedented ways. Nowhere is this more evident than in his monumental mural, The Last Supper, created between 1495 and 1498 for his patron, the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. Breaking away from traditional, static depictions, Leonardo captured a moment of explosive psychological tension, the exact second Jesus announces, "One of you will betray me." To showcase the diverse psychological reactions, Leonardo masterfully grouped the apostles into 4 distinct groups of 3, radiating in a wave-like motion from the geometric center of the composition, the figure of Christ himself. Ever the inventor, Leonardo refused to use the traditional fast-drying wet fresco method. Instead, he experimented with egg tempera on a dry base of oil and lead white so he could paint slowly and make revisions. Though this experimental technique tragically caused the painting to begin deteriorating within his own lifetime, the psychological depth he achieved forever changed the art world. This relentless experimentation extended to his most famous work, the Mona Lisa. To achieve the painting's famous, mysterious lifelikeness, Leonardo utilized a technique called sfumato. Modern X-ray analysis reveals that he applied up to 40 ultra-thin layers of glaze, sometimes no thicker than 2 microns, which is 50 times thinner than a human hair. He likely applied these microscopic layers using his fingers, allowing each to dry over periods of months, meaning the portrait took years to complete. Recently, scientists discovered another secret hidden in the Mona Lisa's base layer, the presence of plumbanacrite, a rare lead oxide compound. Leonardo ingeniously heated lead oxide powder in oil to thicken the paint and help it dry, proving he was in a deeply experimental mood. Furthermore, researchers suggest he utilized the mathematics of the golden ratio, a concept of divine proportion he explored while illustrating a book for mathematician Luca Pacioli, to achieve perfect visual harmony in his compositions. But to paint the human form with such divine proportion, Leonardo felt compelled to understand what lay beneath the skin. Long before the term scientist existed, he became a pioneer of anatomy, secretly dissecting human corpses to understand how muscles, bones, and organs functioned. His studies of the human heart were particularly revolutionary. At a time when medical knowledge relied on ancient, flawed texts claiming the heart had only 3 chambers and was the spiritual seat of the soul, Leonardo discovered the truth. After performing an autopsy on a 100-year-old man who had died peacefully, Leonardo became the first person in history to describe coronary artery disease, noting that the man's vessels were thickened and ossified. He correctly identified the heart as a muscle with 4 chambers and documented how aortic valves close via vortex currents in the blood, a hydrodynamic phenomenon only confirmed by modern science 4 centuries later. He even observed subtle medical conditions like xanthelasma, yellowish cholesterol deposits, and accurately painted them onto the eyelid and hand of the Mona Lisa. Leonardo's understanding of anatomy and physics inevitably bled into his career as a military engineer. Employed by the Milanese court, he filled pages with designs for giant crossbows, tanks, and submarines. However, his ultimate obsession was conquering the sky. While he initially designed ornithopters, machines with flapping wings, he soon realized that human muscle could never sustain such flight. Shifting his focus, he wrote the Codex on the Flight of Birds in 1505. In this manuscript, written backward in his famous mirror script, he analyzed the relationship between a bird's center of gravity and lifting pressure, the concept of aerodynamic stall, and the use of shifting body weight to steer, the exact same principles the Wright brothers would use to invent the airplane 400 years later. These groundbreaking insights were not published in his lifetime. They were hidden away in his voluminous notebooks. Today, approximately 7,000 pages of his estimated 13,000 pages of notes survive. For 3 centuries after his death, these notebooks were scattered in private collections, leaving the world to remember Leonardo merely as a great painter. When his codices were finally studied in the 19th century, a new picture emerged. But these notebooks didn't just contain flying machines and anatomical diagrams, they also revealed his sharp wit and his role as a court entertainer. To amuse Lodovico Sforza's high society, Leonardo composed a series of prophecies, which were actually clever riddles. He would describe a mundane event as if it were an apocalyptic nightmare. For example, he predicted, "Many will be those who will flay their own mother, turning her skin inside out." The terrifying imagery was simply a riddle about farmers plowing the earth. He warned that, quote, "People will throw away from their own homes the provisions meant to sustain their lives," a poetic description of sowing grain. These riddles perfectly capture how Leonardo's mind operated. He looked at ordinary everyday life from an entirely unique, slightly distorted, and deeply analytical perspective.
Leonardo da Vinci lived a 15th century life, but a vision of the modern world spread before his mind's eye. In his own era, he was recognized as a titan, famously engaging in a fierce artistic rivalry with the younger, ambitious Michelangelo, with both masters commissioned to paint grand battle scenes on opposite walls of Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. Though neither completed their frescoes, the creative duel cemented their legendary status. Yet Leonardo's true legacy extends far beyond the canvas. Today, modern medicine is still catching up to him. In 2020, scientists using artificial intelligence and MRI scans finally understood the function of the complex, snowflake-like muscle fibers in the heart called trabeculi, structures that Leonardo was the very first to discover and draw 500 years ago. His Codex on the Flight of Birds recently went on display at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, resting just a few feet away from the 1903 Wright Flyer, a poetic meeting of geniuses across the centuries. Leonardo da Vinci's life reminds us that the greatest minds are those who never stop learning, never stop asking questions, and never stop dreaming of what is possible. He challenged conventional thinking in nearly everything he approached, establishing a new framework for innovation. He was not just a man of his time, he was a man of the future. And through his relentless curiosity, he painted that future, one brush stroke, one sketch, and one revolutionary idea at a time.